Senna is trying to go through on the inside, and it's happened immediately. This is amazing. Senna goes off at the first corner, but what has happened to Prost? He has gone off too. Well, that is amazing, but I fear absolutely predictable. Pete Dam wins, looks through a completely clean windscreen, and that's the big advantage, of course, of being in front. And that's the big disadvantage of getting your line wrong. And Nigel Mansell has won. He is exuberant, and he's got every justification to be. This is the opportunity that Senna's looking for, and he's going through. Ouch! Oh my goodness, this is fantastic. They beat. This is what we were fearing might happen during the race. And that means to say that Prost has won the World Championship. And there's an engine blowing it. It's Damon Hill. What can I or anybody say?
Murray Walker at the Beeb in conversation with Bruce Jones.
Murray Walker, it seems as though you've been the voice of motorsport forever. Just when did it all begin?
I suppose it began when I was born, because I was literally born into a motorsport environment. My father, Graham Walker, started racing motorcycles in 1920. I was born in 1923. He didn't retire until 1935. And when he retired, he had won the TT, and he was the equivalent of world champion in motorcycle racing. It was European champion in those days. And so I had spent 12 years from the time I was born until he retired, very much involved with motorcycle racing, going around everywhere with him and my mother, and I used to go on the continent with them at a time when it was very unusual for anybody to have left this country. And so I was absolutely soaked in motorsport. But to be perfectly honest with you, I wasn't particularly enthralled with it. It was something my father did. I've had Damon Hill say exactly the same thing to me, incidentally. I mean, it was something that Dad did, and it was the way he earned his living, so you weren't particularly interested. And my mother has told me that she used to be infuriated with me when I was about 5 at the Isle of Man for the TT races, because I would go over there and sit in the grandstand with everybody thundering by, reading my comic, and I wasn't the least bit interested in it. But I gradually became more interested, and then I went away to the war. I was in the army, in the Royal Scots Greys during the war, and I got very interested then in motorcycling in general and motorcycle sport in particular. And when I came out, having run a brigade motorcycle club, I got special leave to go to the first race that had been held in the Isle of Man since before the war, and that was the 1946 Manx Grand Prix. And that's, I think, the catalyst that really brought to the fore everything that had been developing inside me over the years.
At what stage did you decide you actually wanted to follow your father into commentary work?
I find it even more difficult to answer that question. I mean, my father had been commentating since 1935. I'm a frustrated racer. I would like to have been Stirling Moss, not Murray Walker. That would be my ideal. And I decided I was going to race motorcycles, so I took up motorcycle racing and trials riding and enduros and all that sort of thing. And I was reasonably good, but not as good as I wanted to be. And somehow, during that time, round about 1949, I decided I wanted to be a commentator, like my father. I think my father had an enormous effect on the development of myself as an individual. I had an enormous amount of admiration for him, and he was a wonderful man, and I admired everything that he had done in life. And I think subconsciously I wanted to emulate him. And when I decided I wasn't good enough to race, and I had a job to do, and the truth of the matter is, I suppose the job was more important than the racing. To cut a long story short, I got an audition at Shelsley Walsh Hill Club. That was in 1948. And I got the audition because my father was going to be doing the commentary on radio. There wasn't any television in those days. And for some reason he had to drop out. The man who was going to do the public address did the BBC thing, and the Midland Automobile Club said to my father, "You got us into this hole, you get us out of it. Can you recommend anybody to do it?" And he said, "Why don't you give the boy a go?" Thinking, because he's told me this, thinking that if I made a mess of it, it really didn't matter very much because there weren't going to be many people there, and if I got it right, it might help. But as far as I was concerned, this was my golden opportunity. And There was one person that I wanted to reach at Shelsley Wharf, and that was a chap called Jim Pestridge. And Jim Pestridge was the BBC producer for the broadcast. And you will know that the way you do public address commentary and the way you do radio or television commentary are three very different things. Public address, everybody's there, they can see what you're talking about, you give them the basic information, you don't need to tell them that so-and-so is being particularly spectacular, they can see that. But I decided I was going to give them a non-stop blast on how I thought a radio commentary ought to be done, knowing that Jim Pestridge would not be able to avoid it because it was coming out of the loudspeakers at him. And that was what I did. And as a result of that, I got an audition to go down to Goodwood to do some commentary on car racing. Now, at the time, I was very much a motorcycle man, very interested in cars, yeah, absolutely, and I thought I knew a lot about them. But I didn't regard myself as an expert, and I went down, and a chap called Geoffrey Petty, BBC producer, gave me some races to talk about. Reg Parnell in a 4 CLT Maserati, and the Ashmore brothers had given Reg Parnell a car, and I commentated. And this was in the days, Bruce, when you didn't record onto tape or digital things or anything like that. You actually recorded onto a disc, and they had a pickup and a needle, and the sound went through the pickup and the needle and cut grooves into the disc. And shortly after I'd done the audition, they required me to appear at Broadcasting House, and they said, it went very well, we'd like you to do the second point at the British Grand Prix. And so I did the second point at the British Grand Prix in 1949, and that was my first broadcast, and it's developed from that. Like Topsy, it's grown.
But at this stage, you had a day job as well. This was the commentating was something you hoped to grow into at the weekends.
Yeah. My day job was advertising, and I was lucky enough to be doing well in it, and it was an enormously interesting and exciting job, and that was what I did from Monday to Friday. And the broadcasting was, and remained until 1982, very much a hobby.
But when you went to the British Grand Prix in 1949, this really was the first of the big events you covered. Did it run as smoothly as you'd hoped?
I didn't know what was going to happen. I was enormously excited and fired up about the whole thing, and I was at Stowe Corner. And the number one commentator at the grandstand was Max Robertson. Max Robertson, who subsequently went on to make a name for himself as the BBC's tennis commentator and as the presenter of Going for a Song, the Antiques programme. And Max knew roughly as much about motor racing as I know about fly fishing. And he was bubbling on at the grandstand, and I was giving it plenty down at Stowe. But to answer your question, no, it did not go at all as I expected, because at some point in the race, and this was at a time, Bruce, when the crowd was separated from the public by a piece of rope and maybe some straw bales, and the cars were going jolly nearly as quickly then as they do now. And John Bolster, who subsequently went on to become the BBC's man in the pit lane, was driving an ERA, very colourful character, and he lost control of it coming down the Hangar Straight, and literally went end over end and was deposited, no safety belts in those days, no overalls, no crash helmets, was deposited in an inert heap, literally at my feet. I was standing up, as I did and still do, in the commentary box, and I thought, he's dead. He's dead. I thought, they didn't tell me what to do about this. What on earth do I say now? So I said, Bolster's gone off, which was perfectly true. Slight understatement. And he had a tartan shirt on, and I, looking quickly at him, thought it was blood. I thought he was cut to ribbons and was lying there dead at my feet. But, as you will know, fortunately, he was perfectly all right. And as soon as the first session finished, I ran all the way from Stowe to the grandstand, which is a good mile, I should think, burst into the main control room, and I said to Geoffrey Peck, was that all right? What are you doing here? He said. I said, was that all right? Of course it was all right. He said, no, get back there. So I had to run another mile back, and it went well, and so it all grew from that.
But back in those days, what equipment were you using, and how much did you know what was happening on the other side of the track?
Oh, nothing was the answer. In those days, you'd say, Max Robinson would be saying, So de Graffenried goes round Stowe Corner and on towards Beckett's, over to Murray Walker. I said, nice one, Max. They're coming down the hangar straight towards me. Now, there was always a back to you, Max. Over to you, Murray. Back to you, Max. And this was going on the whole time, which never happens now, of course. And we had a lip mic, actually the same sort of lip mic then as you have now, because I gather it's a basic design that you can't improve. But the rest of the stuff was very rudimentary, and the techniques, when you listen to the techniques now, you think, gosh, that's incredibly old-fashioned. How did we get away with it?
De Graffenried is now taking Stowe Corner for the last time this afternoon. He bounces a bit as he goes round with his yellow wheels spinning, and he's motoring as he goes down to the chicane. He looks back to see if there's any opposition. He's going up to the hairpin bend, taking no chances this time, and is now heading up the straight to the Abbey curve, and I think in about 3 seconds, Max, he'll be into your sight to take over the finishing line, because he's just crossing in front of the hangar now.
Can't see him. Is he going to come in a moment? He'll be here. Yes, he's here, flashing into sight. But is this the last lap? Yes, it is. I think it is the last lap. Up goes the checkered flag, and he's the winner. Well done to Graffenried. Listen to him go by.
That is the...
So, Murray, nearly 5 decades ago, does that bring back a sea of memories?
It's the first time I've heard it since 1949, and I'm flabbergasted. It all sounds terribly polite and awfully restrained, and it seemed to me that there was only one car in the whole race. It was incredibly quiet. Well, I said the techniques are different, and that more than confirms it. I think it's a lot more exciting now.
But going back to 1949, your performance at Silverstone at the British Grand Prix was adjudged obviously a great success. You moved on into commentating on other sports, I believe.
Well, funnily enough, I was sitting in the office one day, and they phoned me and said, we want you to do a job for us, Murray. And I said, oh yeah, what's that? They said, well, I'm afraid it's motorcycles. Can you do that? And I said, well, I don't know what I actually said, but what I thought was, can a duck swim? Because my audition at Goodwood on cars was strange to me. I'd seen a lot of car racing, and I'd read a lot about it, and I knew a fair amount about it. But motorcycles was where I came from, quite literally. And I grasped the opportunity with both hands. I did the Isle of Man TT with my father and 3 other commentators, because it's a 37 3/4 mile lap, and there were 5 commentary positions, which developed into 7 commentary positions. And I did the Isle of Man TT with my father in 1949, and I stood at Ballacrane in the escape road, and I stood there with a sort of harness on me, with a microphone, lip mic slotted into the harness with my earphones on. I had a wire going off to the side of the road. I had my clipboard, and I just stood there commentating. And they were coming straight down the road towards me and braking for this right angle bend, and they were doing, even in those days, about 130 miles an hour. And I remember I jolly nearly got killed, because Les Graham, who was one of the top riders of the day, came battling down the road towards me on a 350 AJS, left the braking too late, and he went past me with about 2 inches to spare. But that was my baptism of fire, and I subsequently went on and did all kinds of motorcycle racing, especially the TT, the Ulster Grand Prix, Scarborough, Silverstone, Brands Hatch, anywhere that the BBC did motorcycle racing, and they did an enormous amount in those days.
But rumour has it you were also involved in commentating on sports such as weightlifting.
It's not a rumour, Bruce, it's a fact. It's a fact. Because Paul Fox, God, at the BBC, phones. Are you doing anything on Saturday, Murray said. This was a Thursday. Not really, Paul, I said. And he said, I want you to do a job for me. I said, oh yeah, what's that? He said, I want you to go to Bristol and commentate on Great Britain versus the Commonwealth weightlifting championships. And he said, don't say you don't know anything about weightlifting, because nor does anybody else, and you've got until Saturday to find out. So I said, all right. You do in those circumstances say all right. So I thought, how on earth do I find something out about weightlifting before Saturday? I got my secretary to bring in the telephone directory, B for British. Every organisation has got some kind of governing body. So I looked up British, and there's a thing called the British Weightlifting Federation, and I rang them, and I said, can you tell me who's in charge? Yes, Mr. Oscar State, who is the doyen of weightlifting, or was. I said, can I speak to him? Yes. So I get through to him. I said, Mr. State, you don't know me. I'm Murray Walker. I'm going to be doing the television commentary at Bristol on Saturday. I seem to have mislaid my handbook. Every sport has a handbook. I said, have you got a spare one I can have? Yes, he said, I'll send it round. Which he did. I said, how are you getting to Bristol on Saturday? He said, I'm going on the train. No, you're not. I said, you're coming in the car with me. If you'll do one thing. And he said, what's that? I said, talk about nothing else but weightlifting. He said, I never talk about anything else. So when I get the book, the handbook, I looked at it quickly, phoned home to my wife, Elizabeth, and I said, have we got a broom handle? Yes, she said. What do you want that for? I said, I'll tell you when I get back. So I spent the whole evening practicing under her tuition, the press, the snatch and the jerk, which are the 3 lifts that you have to do in weightlifting. And I took Oscar down, Bruce, and I met all the competitors, and most of them were West Indian Railway men from Reading, salt of the earth. And one of them was a bloke whose name I've forgotten, who went on to become a world champion. Golden Delicious or something like that his name was. And again, this one actually went quite well, but I think Paul Fox decided that my forte was motorsport, and that was it.
Precious Mackenzie, I
Precious
believe, is
Mackenzie,
the name.
that's it. I wasn't all that far off, was I? Precious Mackenzie. How do you know that? That's him, yes.
So you'd seen off these alternative sports, and you went back more full-time into motorcycling in particular in the 50s.
Well, they kept on asking me to do motorcycle things, and if you like doing them, you get to be good at it, and if you get to be good at it, they keep on asking you to do them. And so, yes, I became the BBC's motorcycle man with my father, Bruce, and there was never any question of me wanting to outdo my father, because I revered the man, and he was a brilliant broadcaster, and I listen to his stuff now with admiration and respect.
Murray, when digging through the archives at the BBC, we came across some wonderful recordings of the early pieces of work you did with your father, and one of which, the one we have here, is the 1951 Senior TT.
Wow, I'd love to hear that.
Here he is. Jeff Duke is flashing down towards me at Craignabar now, straight in the middle of the road. The crowd is to put it mildly, tense with excitement. All heads is waving programmes. Here he is. Listen to the hand clapping, cheering. Oh, this is a wonderfully stirring sight. Listen to him. But Graham, I know you want to take Jeff through, so to take Jeff through to the grandstand on his last lap, over to Graham Walker. There, I see that. Yes, I can see. There's the flash of his machine as it comes round the bend. He's coming down the straight now at a terrific speed. Listen.
So Murray, listening to that, I can pick up certain similarities in your style with your
Well,
father's.
just thinking, listening to him again, Bruce, I can see where I get my style from, and I can't start to tell you the magic of the Isle of Man for TT Week. It's an absolutely fabulous place, beautiful scenery, everybody's there for the same reason, an absolutely unique race, 37 3/4 mile lap, and it's a time trial as much as a race. And it's in my bone marrow, and it all brought it back to me. I've had some fabulous times there.
Murray, away from motorcycle racing, you were very much number 2 at the BBC on the motorsport side, behind Raymond Baxter in the 60s and the 70s.
Yes, that's true. As time wore on, and now I was doing a lot of work for ITV, incidentally, as well as the BBC, because I was doing motorcycle scrambles, both for them and for the BBC. And then in 1978, the BBC decided that they were going to do all the Formula One events during the year, all 16 events. They'd been doing odd ones, and Raymond had done most of them. I did the odd one too when Raymond couldn't. So I was sort of easing into Formula One at the same time as Raymond was easing out of it. And they made the policy decision in 1978, after James had become world champion and the whole of Britain had become fired up about Formula One, that they were going to do all the races. And I was very flattered when they asked me to do them.
But Murray, back in the 70s, your voice was particularly well known on Saturday afternoons on BBC Grandstand as the voice of Rallycross.
It was a great, spectacular, exciting sport, and the public took it to their hearts.
But like in all forms of motorsport, you have to think on your feet.
Yeah, are you leading diplomatically up to the gaffes, Bruce? Yes. I have to say that there were a lot of them in rallycross. Things like, I remember on one occasion I said, the advantage that this chap has got is that he started off well, and as a result of that, he's got a clear windscreen. And as I said this chap crosses the finishing line and loses control and goes straight into a grass bank, and it was television in front of everybody. The next one was what I think of as the Lidden Holes incident, and I remember saying, Hastelo's great advantage is that with the holes in the windscreen he can see where he was going, and as I said this, he left the track, hit a bank and disappeared through a plywood hoarding, and the commentary actually went, as a result of which he can see where he's going. What am I saying? This was at a time when the television programme was called Sports Night with Coleman, and David had a request item, and my Lidden Holes incident with Hastelo was the most requested item they ever had on Sports Night with Coleman. 6 weeks in succession they ran it.
3 escorts, first, second and third. Not surprisingly, because they're all escorts in this race. Must be all up now. I don't think John Priestley's going to have a hope up.
Yes, he is. Priestley's through.
I was just about to say that Priestley hadn't got a hope of passing Martin Schenker when he did it before my very eyes. Pete Dam wins, looks through a completely clean windscreen, and that's the big advantage, of course, of being in front. And that's the big disadvantage of getting your line wrong.
The point about Pete Dam and me making the gaff there was that, as I said, he has a big advantage because he can see where he's going. He went off the course and straight into a grass bank, right in front of the viewers, because the camera was on the bank.
And Murray, as well as four-wheeled motorsport and rallycross, you're also famous for scrambling, and that was another sport where anything seemed to happen.
Yeah, I did motorcycle scrambling for years for ITV and the BBC, and that was, like rallycross, a tremendously visual sport. It's exciting, it's noisy, there's people thrusting and shoving and sticking their knees out, and there's mud flying everywhere. And Dave Bickers became a national idol in Britain, this motocross man, and there were people like Jeff Smith and Vic Eastwood, and them riding BSA Gold Stars and Greaves and Husqvarnas, and it was a wonderful sport. And you were talking about gaffes earlier on. I think one of the classic ones, which I talk about in after-dinner speeches, but can't do too much on television for reasons which will become clear to you, is that one of the top men was a chap called Arthur Lampkin, a burly, determined Yorkshireman who rode a Gold Star BSA. And these were in the days when you had what they called a bum pad on the back mudguard of the bike, and it's a bit of padding, and you stand up on the footrests, and while you're rushing across country in the bumps and the bike's taking off, and you hang on to the handlebars with your feet on the footrests. And Arthur hits an enormous bump, takes off, and his feet left the footrests, and he landed with a sickening crunch between the saddle and the bum pad. My God, I said, he's trapped his knackers. But as the words were actually on the way from the brain to the mouth, I said to myself, Murray, they're not going to like this. And what I actually said was, my God, he's trapped his knickers. Now, it wasn't a very good line, Bruce, but as a result of thinking of it, I am talking to you now. And in 1962, the then top man of BBC Sport, a very rough, tough, gruff Lancastrian called Brian Cargill, who went on to greatness in television, sent for me and he said, we've been watching this television motocross stuff on ITV, Murray, and I want to offer you a contract for BBC. I said, well, that's very nice. And he said, this is what we're going to do, this is the number of events we're going to do, and this is how much we're going to pay you. And I said, that's very nice. Happy. He said, before we go any further, so I'm perfectly aware of the fact that you're working for ITV, and if you sign this contract, it will in no way inhibit you from continuing to work for BBC for just as long as it takes us to find a replacement. And I said, right, I think I've got the drift of your message, Brian. And I signed the contract and never regretted it.